The polished marble floor was cold enough to steal the breath from my lungs, but I knelt anyway, my head bowed and my threadbare dress cooling around my trembling knees. I did not dare look at him, the man, the Alpha, whose judgment could shatter our world. His scent filled the grand hall, a primal and terrifying mix of pine after a storm, cold steel, and the apex predator he was. My own father, the Alpha of the Silvermoon Pack, stood rigidly to the side, his shame a palpable heat in the air. He was ashamed of the debt, ashamed of this meeting, and most of all, ashamed of me. I was the offering he never wanted to make. Before us, lounging on the ceremonial throne with an unnerving stillness, was Alpha Kalen of the Shadowclaw Pack. He hadn't moved a muscle since we'd entered, his silence a far greater weapon than any snarl. The debt my father owed was not in gold, but in blood and bond. A strategic mating. My beautiful, perfect, radiant sister, Lyra, was the intended price. But Lyra was in love with another, and her heart was too fragile for this harsh bargain. So I had done the unthinkable. I had offered myself. She is not the one we agreed upon. Kalen's voice was a low growl that vibrated through the floor, through my bones, making my teeth ache. My father flinched. Alpha Kalen, my humblest apologies. Lyra is unwell. My other daughter, Ilara, offers herself in tribute. She is strong. She will serve you well. Silence, Kalen commanded, and the word cut my father off like a blade. The heavy silence returned, stretching for an eternity. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the rejection, the fury, the war he was entitled to declare. I waited for him to demand Lyra. Instead, I heard the soft scrape of his boots on the marble as he rose. His shadow fell over me, a chilling eclipse. A large, calloused hand entered my vision, and a single finger hooked under my chin, forcing my head up. I finally met his eyes. They were not black, as the legends claimed, but the color of moss and stone, ancient and piercing, and they saw everything. They saw my fear, my desperation, and the defiant spark I couldn't quite extinguish. He studied my plain face, my muted brown hair, my form that was healthy but held none of Lyra's ethereal grace. A long moment passed. Then his lips curved into a smile that held no warmth, only a chilling satisfaction. No, he said, his gaze locked on mine, a predator claiming his unexpected prize. He ignored my father completely. You are mistaken. This is the one I want. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. My father's gasp was sharp, a sound of utter disbelief. Alpha Kalen, you can't be serious. She is not fit to be an Alpha's mate. Lyra is the jewel of our pack. Kalen's grip on my chin tightened almost imperceptibly, his thumb stroking my jawline in a gesture that was both possessive and threatening. His gaze never left mine. The jewel of your pack is flawed. I require strength, not decoration. I have made my choice. He released me and turned to his two guards, massive shifters who flanked the throne. Take her, gather her things. We leave at dusk. He spoke of me as if I were a parcel to be collected. There was no negotiation. His word was absolute. My father sputtered, his face a mask of confusion and horror. A man whose carefully laid plans had just been torched by a whim he couldn't comprehend. He had expected to bargain, to plead, perhaps even to sacrifice me in a show of appeasement before being forced to produce Lyra. He had not expected this. He had not expected me to be chosen. The guards moved toward me, and I flinched, scrambling to my feet. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through my resolve. This was real. I was leaving everything I had ever known, bound for the harsh, wild lands of the Shadowclaw Pack, a place whispered about in fearful tones. They were said to be more wolf than man, ruled by an alpha who was a legend of brutality and power. And I, Ilara, the quiet one, the overlooked one, was to his. My things were few: a couple of worn dresses, a book of herb lore, and a small, carved wooden wolf my mother had given me before she passed. The guards waited with unnerving patience outside my small room as I packed my meager belongings into a burlap sack. Lyra burst in, her face streaked with tears, her golden hair a mess. She was still beautiful, even in her distress. "Ilara, you can't do this," she cried, throwing her arms around me. "He's a monster! They'll tear you apart!" I stiffened at her touch. For years, I had lived in her shadow, absorbing the sting of every comparison, the casual cruelty of being the lesser daughter. Her tears now felt less for me and more for her own narrow escape. "You are in love with Rorik," I said, my voice flat. "You would have withered and died in the Shadowclaw Mountains. This is the only way." "But you—" She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. "What about you?" "I am stronger than you think," I said, pulling away and shouldering my sack. It was a lie, and it was the truest thing I had ever said. The journey was brutal. We didn't travel by modern means, but ran, shifting into our wolf forms. Kaelin's guards were enormous, their pelts the color of shadow and rock. My own wolf, smaller and sleeker, with fur the color of fallen leaves, struggled to keep pace. Kaelin himself ran at the head of the party. His wolf was a creature of nightmare and legend, impossibly large, with fur as black as a moonless night and those same piercing moss-green eyes. He never looked back, not once, but I felt his awareness of me, a constant pressure at the edge of my senses. We crossed the boundary into his territory as the last light of day bled from the sky. The air changed immediately. It grew colder, wilder. The scent of pine was overwhelming, and the very ground felt ancient, humming with a power that vibrated up through my paws. The Silvermoon Pack, my home, cultivated manicured lawns and lived in pristine, human-like houses. The Shadowclaw territory was untamed. Their dwellings were built into the mountainside, great halls of timber and stone that looked as if they had grown from the rock itself. Shifters moved with a fluid grace that spoke of a life lived closer to the wolf within. They were larger, rougher, and their gazes were sharp and assessing as I was led, in my human form once more, into the heart of their settlement. Whispers followed me. "That's her? So small. Where is the golden-haired one we were promised?" I lifted my chin, remembering the promise I had made to myself. I would not break. Kaelin led me to a large stone chamber. It was Spartan but clean, with a hearth where a fire already crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. A thick fur pelt lay on the bed. "This will be your room," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. He stood in the doorway, a formidable silhouette against the torchlight of the corridor. "You will be fed. You will be clothed. You will not leave without a guard. Do you understand?" I nodded, unable to find my voice. Why? The word escaped me, small and thin. He tilted his head, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Why what? Why me, not my sister? He stepped into the room, closing the distance between us until I had to crane my neck to look up at him. His proximity was overwhelming, his power a physical force that made the air thick and hard to breathe. He reached out, not to my chin this time, but to a loose strand of my simple brown hair, rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger. "Because your sister is a hollow, gilded cage," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Pretty to look at, but empty inside. You," he leaned closer, his scent enveloping me, "you are a locked room, and I want to know what's inside." He released my hair and stepped back, his expression once again an unreadable mask of stone. "Rest. Tomorrow your new life begins." He left, closing the heavy wooden door behind him with a definitive thud that echoed the closing of a chapter in my life. I was alone, a prisoner in a stone room, chosen by a monster for reasons I couldn't fathom. I sank onto the fur-covered bed, the exhaustion of the journey crashing over me. But beneath the fear, a tiny, unfamiliar seed of something else took root. No one had ever looked at me and seen anything other than not Lyra. Kaylin had looked at me and seen something worth taking. I didn't know if it was a curse or a blessing. I only knew that for the first time in my life I had been seen, and it was the most terrifying and exhilarating feeling I had ever known. The next morning, a stern-faced woman named Helga brought me a simple breakfast of smoked meat, hard cheese, and a mug of bitter steaming tea. She left a pile of clothes on a wooden chest, practical tunics, leggings, and sturdy boots made of soft leather. They were a far cry from the restrictive dresses I was used to, and infinitely more suited to the rugged terrain outside my window. Helga's expression was pinched, her dislike for me clear. "The Alpha expects you in the training grounds in an hour," she said, her voice clipped. "Don't be late." The training grounds were a vast, dusty bowl carved out of the mountainside. Here, the raw power of the Shadowclaw pack was on full display. Shifters sparred, their movements a brutal dance of strength and instinct. They were not playing. The snarls were real, the thud of bodies hitting the packed earth was heavy, and the scent of sweat and aggression was thick in the air. I saw Kaylin immediately. He stood in the center of the grounds, shirtless despite the mountain chill, his torso a roadmap of scars. He was demonstrating a disarming technique on a shifter nearly his size, moving with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. He flipped the man onto his back with fluid grace and pressed a forearm to his throat, holding him there until the other wolf tapped out in submission. He rose, his chest heaving slightly, and his eyes scanned the crowd, landing directly on me. He beckoned with a sharp jerk of his head. My heart hammered against my ribs as I made my way through the throng of powerful shifters. Their eyes followed me, filled with curiosity and suspicion. I felt like a lamb walking into a wolf den, which was, ironically, exactly what I was. "You came," he said, his voice flat. "I was told to. Good, you can follow orders." He tossed a training knife, a blunted piece of steel, toward me. I fumbled it, barely catching it before it hit the ground. A few of the watching wolves snickered. Heat flooded my cheeks. "What is this for?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Your pack is soft," he stated, circling me slowly, his eyes raking over me from head to toe. "You live in your pretty houses and forget what you are. You rely on diplomacy and trade. Here, we rely on this." He tapped his own chest, over his heart. "And this," he pointed to his temple. "Strength and cunning. Every member of my pack must be able to defend themselves, including you." I don't know how to fight." "I know," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Brynja." A tall, formidable shield maiden of a woman with braided red hair and startlingly blue eyes stepped forward. She looked me over with a critical eye, her expression unimpressed. "This is the one, Alpha?" "This is her," Kalen confirmed. "Train her. See what she's made of." Brenya grunted. "She looks like she's made of willow branches. She'll snap." "Then she snaps," Kalen said, his voice cold as ice. "But I don't think she will." He turned and walked away, leaving me with the terrifying warrior woman. My training was agony. Brenya was relentless. She showed me no mercy, shoving me, tripping me, and disarming me with humiliating ease. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest. I was covered in dust and bruises within the first hour. The other shifters watched, some openly laughing, others shaking their heads in pity. But I did not cry. I did not complain. Every time Brenya knocked me down, I got back up, my jaw set, my resolve hardening with every fall. I would not give Kalen, or any of them, the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would not be the fragile, useless thing they expected me to be. Days turned into weeks. A routine formed. Mornings were spent with Brenya, my body growing stronger, my reflexes sharpening. I was still clumsy, still no match for a true Shadowclaw warrior, but I was learning. I learned to hold my knife, to block a strike, to use an opponent's weight against them. In the afternoons, I was put to work. There were no servants in the Shadowclaw pack in the way I was used to. Everyone had a role. I was assigned to the healing dens with an old, wise woman named Morwen. This was where I found my footing. My knowledge of herbs, once a quiet hobby my father disdained as useless, was vast. Morwen, her face a craggy map of wrinkles, tested me, her eyes sharp. I identified poultices, explained the properties of rare mountain flowers, and knew how to set a broken bone. I found a quiet purpose in the scent of drying herbs and the gratitude of the injured warriors I tended. I rarely saw Kalen. He was a constant, brooding presence at the edge of my life. I would feel his eyes on me at the training grounds, or catch a glimpse of him watching me from the shadows as I worked in the den. He never spoke to me, never approached me, but I always knew when he was there. His presence was a weight, a question mark that hung over my entire existence. One evening, I was gathering moon petal flowers in a small, sheltered meadow on the mountainside. They only bloomed in the full moon's light and were essential for a salve to treat silver burns. I was so focused on my task that I didn't hear him approach. "Those are rare this far north." His deep voice startled me so badly I nearly crushed the delicate blossoms in my hand. I spun around. Kalen stood a few feet away, a dark silhouette against the silvered landscape. He was in his human form, dressed in simple black leather, but the power emanating from him was as potent as ever. "They like limestone soil," I managed, my voice breathless. "There's a vein of it running under this meadow." He walked closer, stopping beside me. We stood in silence for a moment, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind through the pines. "Morwen says you have a gift," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "She says you are a natural healer." "My mother taught me," I said, looking down at the flowers in my basket. "She said it was our duty to mend what is broken." He reached out and gently touched a fresh bruise on my cheek, a gift from Brenya that morning. His calloused fingers were surprisingly gentle. My skin tingled at the contact, a jolt of unexpected heat running through me. "And who mends you when you are broken?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. I had no answer for that. I had always been the one to mend myself. I pulled back, unnerved by the sudden intensity in his eyes, by the strange warmth spreading through my chest. "I should get these back to the den," I said. "Elara." He said my name for the first time since that day in my father's hall. It sounded different on his tongue, less a name and more a statement. I stopped, but didn't turn around. "You are not what I expected," he said. I could feel his gaze on my back, hot and piercing. I said nothing, just clutched my basket tighter and hurried back toward the safety of the settlement, my heart racing with an emotion I couldn't name. It was a chaotic mix of fear and a strange, burgeoning hope. The dynamic between us began to shift. The distance remained, but it was now charged with a new tension. Our paths would cross more frequently. He would appear in the healing den, ostensibly to check on an injured warrior, but his eyes would find mine over the patient's bed. He started taking his evening meal in the main hall again, a practice he had apparently abandoned long ago. He would sit at the Alpha's high table, and I would feel his gaze on me from across the cavernous room. One day, a patrol returned with several injured shifters. They had clashed with a band of rogues near the southern border. One of them, a young wolf named Finn, was badly wounded, his leg mangled and bleeding profusely. Morwen was away, gathering supplies from a neighboring settlement. The other healers were overwhelmed. Panic began to set in. Finn was losing too much blood. Without thinking, I took charge. "Get me hot water and clean linens," I snapped, my voice ringing with an authority that surprised even me. "Brynja, I need you to hold him down. This is going to hurt." I worked quickly, my hands sure and steady. I cleaned the wound, stitched the torn muscle with a gut-string needle, and packed it with a poultice of comfrey and yarrow to stop the bleeding and fight infection. I worked with a singular focus, the world narrowing to the injured wolf in front of me. When I was finally done, I slumped back, exhausted but satisfied. Finn was pale, but his breathing was steady. He would live. I looked up and saw Kalen standing in the doorway. He had been there the whole time, watching me. The entire hall was silent, all eyes on us. He walked toward me, his expression unreadable. He stopped in front of me and looked down at my hands, which were covered in Finn's blood. Then he looked at my face, my brow furrowed in concentration, my tunic stained and messy. He reached out and, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a large and dangerous man, he used his thumb to wipe a smudge of blood from my cheek. "You have a warrior spirit, Elara," he said, his voice low and meant only for me. And in that moment, standing in the middle of the bloody healing den, surrounded by the scent of pain and herbs, I felt something shift deep inside me. The mate bond, dormant and unrecognized, flared to life like a struck match. It was a sudden, dizzying rush of sensation, a sense of rightness, of belonging, of an invisible thread snapping taut between us. I saw a flash of shock in his eyes, mirroring my own. He felt it too. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned, his face hardening into a mask of anger and something else, fear. He turned on his heel and stalked out of the den without another word, leaving me breathless and shaking, the ghost of his touch searing my skin. The world had just tilted on its axis, and I was terrified of where we were about to land. The aftermath of the bond's awakening was a suffocating silence. Kalen avoided me completely. If I entered a room, he would leave. He no longer appeared at the training grounds or in the healing den. The charged connection that had been building between us was severed, replaced by a cold, empty void. But the bond itself was a living thing, a constant thrum beneath my skin. I could feel his emotions, muted and distant, but there. A constant, simmering anger, a deep, gnawing grief, and a profound, soul-deep loneliness that echoed my own. The pack felt the shift, too. The Alpha's moods dictated the atmosphere of the entire settlement. A tense, uneasy quiet fell. Brynja pushed me harder in training, her expression grim. "Whatever you did, undo it," she growled one morning after sending me sprawling for the 10th time. "The Alpha is a storm on the verge of breaking, and we'll all be caught in the downpour." "I didn't do anything," I gasped, pushing myself up from the dust. It wasn't a choice. She just grunted and motioned for me to take my stance again. The isolation was crushing. I had been an outsider before, but now I was a pariah, the source of the Alpha's dark temper. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the quiet rhythm of grinding herbs and binding wounds. Morwen watched me with her wise, knowing eyes, but said nothing, offering comfort in her silent companionship. Weeks passed. The bond was a constant ache in my chest. I felt his presence even when he was miles away, a phantom limb I couldn't ignore. I learned to live with the ghost of his emotions, the sharp sting of his anger, the crushing weight of his sorrow. It was a strange and painful intimacy. One night, unable to sleep, I walked to the edge of the settlement, seeking a moment of peace under the star-dusted sky. I found myself near the Alpha's lodge, a larger stone building set slightly apart from the others. A low, agonized sound drifted from within, a sound of pure pain, halfway between a man's cry and a wolf's howl. Driven by an instinct I didn't understand, I pushed open the heavy wooden door. The room was dark, lit only by the dying embers in a massive stone hearth. Kalen was on his knees in the center of the room, his head thrown back, his body rigid with tension. A half-empty bottle of potent-smelling liquor lay on its side nearby. The scent of his grief was so powerful it was almost a physical blow. He wasn't drunk, he was tormented. "Get out," he snarled without looking at me. His voice was raw with pain. "I can feel you, Elara." Get out of my head. The bond was a two-way street. He could feel my presence, my emotions, just as I could feel his. I didn't leave. I walked slowly toward him, my heart aching with a sympathy that overshadowed my fear. "What is it?" I whispered. "What's hurting you?" "You," he bit out, finally looking at me. His eyes were wild, filled with a pain so deep it stole my breath. "This bond, it's a curse." He staggered to his feet, pacing the room like a caged wolf. "I will not have a mate. I will not feel this. I will not go through that again." Again? The word was barely audible. He stopped pacing and stared into the dying fire. "My first mate," he said, his voice cracking. "Her name was Anya. She was chosen for me by my father, a political alliance. But the bond, it chose us. It was everything." He fell silent for a long moment, lost in a memory that was clearly agony. "She was killed," he finally said, the words torn from him. "Rogues, the same ones who injured your patrol. They are led by a vicious shifter named Silas, who has a personal vendetta against my line. They attacked a scouting party. She was with them. They targeted her to break me, and they did." He turned to face me, and the raw desolation in his expression was a physical wound. The mate bond, when it's severed like that, it doesn't just break your heart. It tries to rip your soul in two. I nearly lost myself. I nearly lost my wolf. I will not survive that again. I will not allow another person to become my weakness. Now I understood. His anger wasn't for me. It was for her, for his loss. His fear wasn't of me, but of what I represented. A chance for happiness he believed would only end in more pain. He saw me not as Elara, but a ghost of a future tragedy. "I am not her," I said softly. He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "It doesn't matter. The bond makes you my vulnerability. Silas is still out there. He knows my patterns. He would sense a mate, a Luna, and he would come for you." "And his voice broke, "I would burn the world to the ground to save you, and in doing so, I would lose everything anyway." The confession hung in the air between us, raw and real. He would protect me. The thought sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with fear. Before I could process his words, the settlement's warning horn blared, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the mountains. Shouts erupted outside. Kalen was instantly transformed. The grieving man vanished, replaced by the Alpha. His eyes sharpened, his body tensed for battle. "Stay here," he commanded, grabbing a wicked-looking axe from the wall. "Lock the door." He was gone before I could protest, swallowed by the night and the rising sounds of conflict. But his last words echoed in my ears. He was terrified of the bond, but he would die to protect it. He would die to protect me. The pain of his rejection warred with a fierce, unexpected surge of protectiveness of my own. He was not a monster. He was a man, deeply wounded and terrified of being hurt again. And I was beginning to realize that I would do anything to keep him from further pain. The battle was short and brutal. Silas's rogues had tested their defenses, a quick, vicious raid designed to sow chaos. By the time I disobeyed his order and crept out of the lodge, it was already over. The Shadowclaw warriors were tending to their wounded. Kalen stood over the body of a dead rogue, his face grim, his axe dripping blood. His eyes found me across the chaotic courtyard, and the look he gave me was one of pure fury. But I saw something else under it, relief. Later, as the settlement settled back into an uneasy quiet, a visitor arrived. I was in the healing den helping Morwen when I heard a familiar voice, high and melodic, laced with a feigned concern that set my teeth on edge. Lyra. My sister stood in the doorway, flanked by two of my father's guards. She was dressed in fine, pristine traveling clothes, looking utterly out of place in the rustic, blood-spattered den. Her eyes swept over the scene with distaste before landing on me. "Ilara! Oh, you poor thing," she said, rushing forward. "When we heard there was an attack, I insisted Father let me come. I had to make sure you were all right." She tried to hug me, but I stepped back. Kalen entered the den right behind her, his expression thunderous. "What is the meaning of this?" he growled, his eyes fixed on my father's guards. "An unsanctioned visit is an act of aggression." Lyra turned to him, her face a perfect mask of sorrowful beauty. "Alpha Kalen, please forgive the intrusion. I was so worried. When I heard you had chosen my sister, I felt such guilt. She is not used to this brutality. She is not fit for this life." She placed a delicate hand on his arm. "I was wrong to refuse the alliance. I see that now. I am here to fulfill my duty. Let my sister return home. I will take her place." My blood ran cold. She was playing her game, the one she had perfected our whole lives, the beautiful, desirable one, making me the unwanted, pitiable afterthought. I looked at Kalen, expecting to see him dismiss her, to send her away. Instead, I saw a flicker of indecision in his eyes. He looked from Lyra's perfect, pleading face to my own, stained with dirt and blood. He was being offered an escape, a way out of the bond he feared, a way to have the alliance without the vulnerability. He could have the jewel of the Silver Moon Pack, the mate everyone expected, and send the locked room away. The heartbreak was a physical blow, sharp and stunning. He was considering it. After everything, after the confession in his lodge, after the bond flared between us, he was actually considering it. I had been a fool to hope. I was nothing more than a substitute, a temporary fix, and the original was here to reclaim her position. The fragile trust, the tentative hope that had been growing in the darkness of my new life, shattered into a million pieces. "Is this true, Alpha?" Lyra's voice was honey-sweet, dripping with false sincerity. "Is she truly the one you want, or was she just a A placeholder until I came to my senses? Kalen's jaw was tight, a muscle twitching along his jawline. His gaze was fixed on me, and what I saw in his eyes was not desire or rejection, but a raw, agonizing conflict. The man who had faced down rogue armies without flinching was being torn apart by a choice. He wanted to reject the bond. He wanted the safety of a political match without the emotional stakes. Lyra was offering him a perfect excuse. My heart fractured. "It's all right," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, though my insides were churning with a cold, sick dread. I looked at Lyra, at her triumphant, pitying smile, and then at Kalen, at his tormented face. "My sister is right. This is her place. I will go." I would not beg. I would not fight for a man who didn't want me. I had more pride than that. I turned to leave, to pack my pathetic little bag and walk back to the life where I was merely a shadow. No. The word was a guttural growl that stopped me in my tracks. I turned back. Kalen had taken a step away from Lyra, putting space between them. His eyes, burning with a new, fierce intensity, were locked on me. "You are not leaving," he said. He then turned his gaze on Lyra, and the cold fury in it made her flinch. "Your senses have nothing to do with this. Your place was offered and rejected. You are not welcome here. You will take your guards, and you will be gone by sunrise. If you are still in my territory when the sun is up, I will consider it an act of war." Lyra's face crumpled, her beautiful mask cracking to reveal the ugly spite beneath. "You would choose her? Over me? Look at her! She's nothing, a dusty little mouse." "She is the future of this pack," Kalen said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "She is my mate, and you will show her the respect she is due." The words "my mate" hung in the air, a definitive, irrevocable claim. He had made his choice. He had chosen the bond. He had chosen me. The relief was so overwhelming, it made me dizzy. Lyra, speechless with rage and humiliation, was herded out by Brenya, who looked positively gleeful. The crisis had passed, but the emotional wreckage remained. Kalen's public declaration had sealed our fate, but it hadn't healed the wound of his hesitation. Later that night, he came to my room. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring into the fire, feeling numb. "Ilara," he said from the doorway. I didn't look at him. "You hesitated." He walked into the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. "Yes." His honesty was brutal. For a moment, the part of me that is a man, the part that remembers the pain, wanted to run, wanted the easy way out. He came to stand before me, looking down at my bowed head. "But the wolf, my wolf, knows its mate. It would have torn me apart from the inside out before it let you go. And the alpha knows strength. Your sister offers weakness in a pretty package. You, Ilara, you offer a core of steel." He knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. They were calloused and warm, engulfing mine completely. "I am sorry. I am sorry for my fear, for my hesitation. It was a wound from my past speaking, not my heart." I finally looked at him, tears blurring my vision. "I thought you were sending me away." "Never," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Not now, not ever." He leaned in, and gently, tentatively, he kissed me. It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise. It was a kiss that tasted of pine and wood smoke, of grief and hope, of two broken pieces trying to fit themselves together. It was the beginning of everything, but our peace was short-lived. A scout, breathless and bleeding, stumbled into the great hall a few days later. "Silas," he gasped, clutching a wound in his side. "He's gathered the rogue packs. He's making a move, and he knows about the Luna." Kalen went still, the promise of violence coiling around him. Silas knew about me. He would come for me, just as Kalen had feared. The prophecy of his past was threatening to become our future. Panic flared in my chest, cold and sharp. Kalen saw it in my eyes. He gripped my shoulder, his touch grounding. "I will not let him harm you," he vowed. But I saw the fear in his own eyes, the terror of history repeating itself. This was not just a battle for territory. It was a battle for our future, and I was the target at its heart. Kalen began preparing for war. The settlement became a hive of activity. Warriors sharpened their blades, Fletchers made arrows, and the air crackled with a grim, focused energy. Kalen was the calm center of the storm, issuing orders with a lethal efficiency. He moved with a purpose that was both inspiring and terrifying. He included me in the war councils. At first, the other pack leaders were skeptical, but Kalen was firm. She sees things we do not. Her counsel is valuable. I was hesitant, but I found my voice. My time in the healing dens, listening to the warrior stories, had given me insight. I knew the terrain. I knew the pack's weaknesses from mending them, and I knew our strengths. I suggested reinforcing a pass that was a known weak point and setting traps in the narrow valleys. I proposed preparing the healing dens for mass casualties, organizing the non-combatants to supply water and aid. My ideas were practical, born not of warrior's pride, but of a healer's pragmatism. The pack leaders began to listen. They began to see me not as the alpha's fragile mate, but as a Luna with a mind for strategy. The night before the battle, Kalen found me on the overlook, staring out at the moonlit mountains. "You are afraid," he said, coming to stand beside me. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Not for myself, for you, for the pack. This is my fight, Elara, my past coming to haunt me." "No," I said, turning to face him. I placed my hand on his chest, over his heart. "It's our fight now. Your past is my past. Your pack is my pack." The raw emotion in his eyes was staggering. He pulled me against him, his arms wrapping around me in a crushing embrace. He buried his face in my hair, and I felt a tremor run through his powerful frame. "I cannot lose you," he whispered, his voice raw. "You will not," I promised, my voice fierce. "I am not made of glass. I will not shatter." He pulled back, his hands framing my face. His eyes searched mine, and what he saw there seemed to soothe the storm inside him. "My wolf chose you from the moment it saw you," he confessed, his voice a low, rough murmur. "That day in your father's hall, I felt it, the pull. I tried to deny it. I told myself it was a whim, a desire to shatter your father's pride. But it was the bond. It knew. It recognized its other half, even when the man was too foolish and scared to see it. He leaned down and kissed me, and this time there was no hesitation. It was a kiss of fire and desperation, of love and fear, a frantic claiming before the world tried to tear us apart. It was a seal on a promise made in the shadow of war. As he held me, he drew back slightly, his eyes glowing with a faint amber light. "The bond must be sealed," he said, his voice deeper, rougher. "A full claiming. It will strengthen us both. It will tie our life forces together. It is the ultimate protection. The claiming. The bite that would mark me as his and him as mine for eternity. It was the deepest level of the mate bond, an act of total trust and surrender. "Yes," I breathed, without a second's hesitation. In the heart of the settlement, surrounded by the silent, watchful members of the pack, he bared his fangs. It was not a gesture of aggression, but of reverence. He lowered his head to the juncture of my neck and shoulder. I tilted my head, giving him access. The bite was a sharp, electric pain that blossomed into a wave of pure ecstasy. I felt his strength, his life force pouring into me and mine into him. The bond between us solidified, becoming a tangible thing, a glowing cord of power that linked our souls. I cried out, not in pain, but in overwhelming sensation. When he pulled away, 2 small marks remained, a permanent symbol of our union. My alpha, my mate. A new strength flooded my veins, a calm certainty settling in my soul. I was no longer just Elara. I was the Luna of the Shadowclaw pack, and I was ready for the war. The horns sounded at dawn. Silas's army was a chaotic tide of snarling rogues swarming up the mountainside. They were driven by desperation and loyalty to their charismatic, brutal leader. The Shadowclaw warriors met them with disciplined fury. The clash of steel and the snarls of shifting wolves echoed through the valley. I was in the main hall, which had been converted into a massive triage center. The wounded began to pour in almost immediately. I worked with Morwen and the other healers, our hands moving with frantic purpose. We stitched, we salved, we set bones. Our world reduced to the immediate, desperate need of the warrior in front of us. But even amidst the chaos, I was connected to Kalen. Through the bond, I felt the pulsing, savage rhythm of his fight. I felt his rage, his focus, his unwavering determination. It was like a lifeline in a storm, and I clung to it. Hours bled into one another. The hall was filled with the groans of the wounded and the metallic scent of blood. We were running low on supplies, on energy, on hope. A warrior stumbled in, his eyes wide with horror. "Silas has broken through the northern pass!" he cried. "He's not with the main force! He's coming for the settlement, for the Luna!" Terror, cold and absolute, seized me. Kalen was on the main battlefront, holding the line. Silas had used the main army as a diversion. He was coming for me. Brenya, who had been tasked with my protection, stood before me, her shield raised. "They will not touch you," she vowed, her blue eyes blazing. The doors to the great hall burst open. Silas stood there, a massive shifter with a cruel, scarred face and eyes that burned with mad hatred. He was flanked by his most vicious fighters. He was Kalen's opposite, all chaotic rage to Kalen's controlled power. "There you are," Silas sneered, his eyes locking on me. "The Alpha's new weakness. He'll come for you, and when he does, he'll be so blind with rage, I'll finally take his head." He lunged. Brenya met his charge with a roar, her sword clashing against his axe. The other healers and the wounded who could still stand formed a desperate makeshift wall around me. But it wouldn't be enough. Silas was a force of nature, tossing Brenya aside with a contemptuous shove. He advanced on me, a triumphant, ugly smile on his face. This was it. Kalen's nightmare was coming true. But as Silas raised his axe, something inside me shifted. The fear did not vanish, but it was overshadowed by a white-hot, protective rage. Rage for Kalen, rage for this pack that had become my home, rage for the wounded and the dying around me. I was not a warrior, but I was a healer, and a healer's first duty is to protect life. I dove for the large cauldron of oil we used for sterilizing instruments, which was simmering over a fire. It was heavy, but adrenaline gave me strength. With a scream that was torn from the depths of my soul, I heaved it, sending a wave of scalding, smoking oil directly at Silas. He howled in agony and rage as the hot liquid seared his skin, his triumphant advance turning into a stumbling, screaming retreat. His fighters, momentarily stunned, hesitated. That was all the opening that was needed. A black-furred whirlwind of death erupted through the shattered doors. Kalen. The bond had screamed my terror to him across the battlefield, and he had come. He was no longer an alpha directing a battle. He was a primal force of nature, a mate defending his own. He moved through Silas's remaining guards like they were nothing, a blur of claws and fangs. He reached my side in a heartbeat, placing his body in front of mine, a living shield. His eyes, glowing with the light of his wolf, scanned me for injuries. Seeing I was unharmed, he turned to face Silas, who was clutching his burned face, screaming curses. "You will never touch her again," Kalen snarled, his voice a low, deathly promise. The fight between them was the stuff of legends. Alpha against alpha. It was not a battle of skill, but of pure, unrestrained fury. They shifted, two massive wolves, one black as night, one a mangy, scarred gray. They tore at each other in the center of the great hall, a maelstrom of teeth and claws. The very stones seemed to shake with the force of their battle. I felt Kalen's pain through the bond as Silas's claws raked his flank, and I cried out. He fed on my presence, my strength, just as I fed on his. He was not just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for us. With a final earth-shaking roar, Kalen locked his jaws on Silas's throat. There was a sickening crunch, and it was over. Silas's body fell to the floor, lifeless. Kalen stood over him, his black fur matted with blood, his chest heaving. The battle was won. The rogues, seeing their leader fall, broke and fled. The Shadowclaw warriors roared in victory. Kalen shifted back, his human form covered in blood and wounds. He ignored the cheering, ignored the other warriors. His eyes found mine. He crossed the hall in 3 long strides and fell to his knees before me, pulling me into a desperate, shaking embrace. He was not an alpha. He was just a man, my man, who had faced down his greatest fear and won. "It's over," I whispered, my tears mingling with the blood on his skin. "It's over." "It's just beginning," he murmured, his voice hoarse. He looked at me, his eyes full of a love so fierce and profound it took my breath away. He had faced his past. He had claimed his future. He had chosen me, and in doing so, he had saved us both. In the days that followed, a new sense of peace settled over the Shadowclaw pack. It was a peace earned through blood and sacrifice, and it was all the more precious for it. We mourned our dead, but we celebrated our victory and the strength of our Alpha and his Luna. My place in the pack was no longer in question. I was not the strange outsider, the quiet replacement. I was their Luna, the healer who had stood her ground, the one who had blinded the enemy Alpha and saved the Great Hall. I had earned their respect not through beauty or birthright, but through courage and a fierce devotion to my new home. Kalen healed, his powerful shifter body mending the wounds of battle. But the deeper wounds, the ones on his soul, were healing too. The ghost of Anya was finally at peace, not replaced, but honored. He no longer feared the bond. He reveled in it. He no longer saw me as a vulnerability, but as his greatest strength. Our love, forged in the crucible of war and loss, was quiet and deep. It was in the way he would seek me out in the healing den, just to watch me work. It was in the way my hand would instinctively find his as we walked through the settlement. It was in the long, silent moments we would share, standing on the overlook, the bond humming between us, a language more profound than words. One evening, months later, Lyra sent a message. It was a short, stilted letter of apology, informing us that she had bonded with Rorik. Her father, his political ambitions with the Shadowclaw Pack dashed, had finally consented. The letter spoke of her happiness, but I could read the envy and regret between the lines. She would always wonder about the powerful alpha she had given up, about the life she had deemed too harsh. I showed the letter to Kalen. He read it and then tossed it into the fire, his expression unconcerned. She has her life, we have ours. He pulled me into his arms, his chin resting on top of my head as we watched the paper curl into ash. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked softly. "Choosing me?" He was silent for a moment. Then he turned me in his arms to face him, his moss and stone eyes serious. "My only regret, Ilara, is that I wasted so much time being afraid. I was so focused on the past that I almost missed the future standing right in front of me." He kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that spoke of a forever I had never dared to dream of. He had taken me in my sister's place, a girl who thought she was a sacrifice. He had seen the strength I never knew I had. He had claimed me, and in his arms I had finally, truly found my home. He would never let me go, and the truth was, I would never want him to. We stood by the fire, two souls bound together, the feared Alpha and his quiet Luna, our shadows dancing on the stone walls as one.